Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Lives Online Conversation. Please join me, Kelly Devine, the Artistic Director, and Nina Strike, the Executive Director, in conversation with Julie Baer Salzman. She'll be talking to us today about her latest project and we'll certainly discuss films that we have been lucky enough to have at previous Global Peace Film Festival iterations. Please do check out peacefilmfest.org to keep up to date on information about the upcoming 2022 Global Peace Film Festival, which it will be our 20th anniversary festival. We have lots of programming planned throughout the year, and you'll want to check out our film festival website. But now, please, let's welcome Julie Baer Salzman. Hi, Julie. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you guys?
Hi, Julie. Great to see you.
Glad to see you again.
And we're really excited to be talking to you about the next film in this series, where we programmed the first film called Just Breathe in the series. In the series, you'll tell us when that was. It was a few years ago now. And then Into Light, which is actually the third film in your series, we also programmed last year in 2020. Was it in, yes, 2020, where it played at the Orlando Museum of Art. So we're so delighted to have you. And let's start by tell us about tell us about the whole series and what you're doing now.
Okay, sure. Well, the series began about 6 or 7 years ago now. And it was really my son who started it off. He was a kindergartner at a little charter school in Los Angeles. And he came home one day with his 5-year-old friend, and they were seated at the table drinking hot chocolate, and they were talking about their amygdalas and their prefrontal cortex and how it gets, how their amygdala gets activated when they're really upset and how they're supposed to take deep breaths to calm it down. And I was in the kitchen, just sort of doing my thing, preparing a little snack. And I'm overhearing this conversation thinking, what on earth is going on at this table with these 5-year-olds? What are they talking about? Fast forward a little bit, turns out that the kindergarten where they were going to had this very strong social emotional learning curriculum. And I contacted the principal to find out, where did she get this curriculum? And, I just wanted to find out more about what they were going to be learning. And she told me about, what the design of it is. And I was really intrigued by that because I thought, wow, here are 5-year-olds learning basically how to regulate themselves, regulate their emotions using breathing exercises. And at that point in my life, I was going through a lot of difficulties myself. I was struggling with it's very personal, but struggling with some sort of deep seated anger and resentment towards a certain person in my life who really hurt my feelings incredibly badly. and I was really kind of struggling with how I, was dealing with this whole situation. And we were having some issues with our marriage, and I recognized in myself that I was basically struggling with other people's anxieties, and I was very reactive, and I wasn't handling things in the way that I thought I could handle them better. So I enrolled in the same course, essentially, that the principal at our son's school did, and which basically was the same curriculum that she then in turn was having the teachers teach the students. So I started my own mindfulness. It was a mindfulness curriculum, and I started my own practice then at that point, and that was, I think, in 2014. And I really quickly recognized just how powerful a mindfulness practice really was. And I noticed the changes in me immediately. And I figured if my son's learning all of this, I should learn this too. And so when I started, I started my practice, and I got really immersed into it. It was like a 6-week educational course. and I loved it. And it was during that one of my classes, let's say it was all online, but we'd have to start I started to meditate daily as a part of the class, and it was honestly like in the middle of a meditation where I just suddenly saw this film in my mind. And I thought, like, wow, how amazing would it be if we could somehow make a little film that captured all of what these kids are learning, and we could then like let them teach us in the way that I felt like my son taught me that day. Just sort of opened my eyes to it. I thought if I could get all these kids from his school and get them to basically teach an audience, right, a film audience. And I saw the sort of the black and white imagery. I saw the close-ups of the eyes and the mouths and the breathing. Like I kind of just saw it all in that moment. And that film, I mean, we kind of made it almost overnight. We shot, and I remember it was in November of 2014. I was done cutting it within a couple weeks, put it all together. And I gave it back to the school as sort of a, hey, maybe you can use this on the website. And that then led to suddenly, I also sent it to the organization that provided the curriculum, that wrote the curriculum. They're called Mindful Schools. They're up in the Bay Area. I sent it to them saying, hey, maybe you guys might be interested in this. You were sort of the inspiration behind all of this. And it exploded. The film just, like, they put it on their website. John Kabat-Zinn, who was then sitting on the board of directors, saw it. He tweeted about it. Oprah, who then, I guess her producers were looking at his Twitter feed because she was going to be interviewing him for an upcoming segment. They found the film. They put it on the show after the interview that she did with John Kabat-Zinn. And the film just blew up. So that kind of started me. I started thinking about, like, okay, wow, like I just did this little thing thinking it was going to be this sweet little film for my son's school, and it turned into this thing has been translated into many languages, and is, I had a friend in Africa shoot me a text saying, I'm sitting at a cafe and your film is on somebody's laptop right next to me right now. So, it just, what it told me was that there was a real need and an interest in a film that seems so simple, but is basically communicating a concept that not many people can imagine putting to images. It's like, how do you put mindfulness to imagery? But I just recognized how effective it was, and how how much need there was for films like this. So then I thought, okay, well, I should just do an entire series. And so I started to conceive of a series that would chronicle sort of the various stages of life and the sort of common habitual state of mind that or an emotional state that tends to arise that we can start to name at that age or at that stage of life. And so I came up with this idea of doing a 6-part series, which started with elementary school and these kids talking about anger and how they use mindful breathing to help themselves process their anger and regulate their emotions. And then I thought, okay, well, after elementary school is middle school. What happens in middle school? You start to feel really stressed and anxious. Okay, we'll do that on anxiety. Well, okay, then after that, then there's high school. And what happens in high school? You start to really feel and name depression. And so as you mentioned earlier, it's like Just Breathe was the anger in elementary school. Release was on anxiety in middle school. Into Light was on depression in high school. And now I'm, starting the 4th film, which is for the 18 to 25-year-old crowd. And I figured that was a good time to address trauma, because at that point in life, people start to feel the impact of whatever unresolved childhood trauma they experienced, or even if it's more immediate, more recent traumas. But I think that that's the time where, that starts to come up in people's lives. And then after that, after this film, which I'm fundraising for now, which I'm tentatively calling Reimagine, but who knows, it might end up being something else. Then I want to move on to midlife and tackle addiction. And then then the final film will be on grief and loss in later years. So we'll kind of run the gamut of like, the stages of life, these different things that we have to deal with commonly, and how mindfulness practice can help people throughout, just navigate those very difficult emotional and habitual states of mind at those different stages of life. And though they're like targeted towards specific groups of people, they really are universal. But I like kind of focusing on a group, on a different age group for each one, because then they can also break it down and use it more for educational purposes and have a very specific audience. And they all still find their wider audience, but they can really be used more in very particular ways.
Well, Julie, I want to really thank you for sharing with us that deeply personal inspiration, as well as telling us the story, which we didn't realize, that your young son came home talking so assuredly and deeply about neuroscience and mindfulness, that inspired you to take this new direction. And before I get to my question, the one last thing I want to say is also, Nina can attest to this, that once we showed the first film in your series, Just Breathe, people embraced it so much. People were just lifted after having seen it. And even years thereafter, we would hear from from regular festival goers, how much that film had really helped them and offer them, a way through their own anxiety. So I just wanted to thank you for having shared this with us. And you're welcome. And because we really mean it. This is what is at the center of our festival, is making these kinds of connections. So you've touched on how you came to focus on this particular topic, this issue, and you've talked about why it's so very important to you. But can you tell us a little bit about your, I know you were talking and you were starting to touch on it at the end. What's your approach for communicating this? Because I'd like to unpack that just a little bit more, because it is difficult sometimes to communicate these things which you can't point to in the way that you can point to a house or some other concrete thing. And I think it's amazing how you've done such a beautiful job in achieving that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We were raising money about 2 years ago for a feature film on mindfulness, and we were having a really hard time raising money for it because of what you're talking about, which is that people are like, I don't know how you make an interesting feature that's compelling on a subject that's really more cerebral. But what I try to do, at least with these short films, is make them more experiential. Like kind of really use music, use it's all about tone. I think like all three of them so far, and even to some extent Surfing Corona, which you guys also I think showed in one of the festivals, right?
Yes, we did.
Which wasn't a part of the series per se. However, it definitely is in the whole sort of larger, under the larger umbrella of mindfulness and short films on mindfulness, right? But I mean, yeah, for me, it's really about using music, really using the editing and it's not just about what people are saying. It's, it's like, how do you design the visuals? What music do you use? How do you really set a tone that puts people in that frame of mind, that puts people in the emotion that the characters are talking about? And I think like with Release and the second film that was for middle school kids and anxiety, I mean, you really feel it in that film. I mean, like I sometimes watch that first half of the film is all about the buildup of how anxiety starts to get more and more overwhelming. And, to the point at which you're just kind of like, Gah! I mean, I watch that film sometimes. I'm like, Gah! Make it stop. And then suddenly, like, she hits a bell, she being the mindfulness leader, and we put these kids in a breathing class with a mindfulness instructor. And then, you know, using again music and the way we cut and the way everything, like it's always all these like little decision, little but huge decisions that start to, you know, add up so that ultimately, yeah, the goal is to have this experience with these emotions and the experience with how mindfulness practice settles the nervous system, you know, kind of regulates your nervous system and sort of brings all the sort of monkey mind, settles the monkey mind, settles the stress, settles the nerves. And, you know, and I think with the depression film, we used a lot of imagery to evoke a sense of, you know, darkness and hopelessness. The first part of Into Light, you know, as you probably recall, is, or might recall, the first bit of that, of these high school teens talking about the depression, the dark, you know, the isolation, the feelings of disconnection, and how those feelings just started to make them feel like they were, you know, just falling into a hole, basically. And yeah, it's imagery, right? It's imagery and it's music and it's the editing, editorial choices when it comes to pacing, and all of that combined, you know, just leads to a more sort of experiential film versus a straight up narrative where you're just telling a story or you're just relying on people to talk. And like, I never like just relying on interviews. I mean, I feel like, you know, that's typically what people do with documentaries. It's a lot of interviews. And yes, the interviews are important. But for example, with this next film that I'm raising money for now, for Reimagine, as I'm starting to envision it, like I'm not sure how many people, talking heads, I'm even really wanting to show for this. You know, it's like, I'm already starting to think of like, how am I going to tell this story in a way that doesn't feel repetitive, that hasn't been done in the series yet. Like each film I try to make very different from the last. Like I don't want any of these films to feel like it's a cookie cutter template. However, that said, I'm already fast forwarding ahead a little bit to the final film on grief and loss, and because I want it to sort of come around full circle, that actually might be in black and white. It'll be a different kind of black and white, but this film on trauma, for example, I'm hoping to use animation if I can raise enough money to find a good animator, because like unfortunately that's the one thing I can't do. I don't know how to animate. I can write and direct and sometimes shoot and do sound, and I can edit, but I'm not an animator. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like just really using the tools. I mean, that's the beauty of filmmaking, right? Is like filmmaking is, you have this incredible range of tools to use as a filmmaker, and, you know, working with different people who bring, you know, a certain kind of experience, knowledge, talent, to the project always is helpful, you know, so it's not just me, but it's, you know, I've got other people kind of partnering and collaborating with me, and then we do it and it's done. And yeah.
Well, and Julie, you know, one of the things that's why we were so attracted to your film is the mission of our own festival, which is to connect people. We certainly want to connect them to films that are well made from a cinematic point of view, but we also want to, even more importantly, connect them to opportunities to take action in their own lives, to take action in their own communities. And you know, so I would strongly recommend anyone who hasn't seen your film and is weighing whether they should support your next film in this series, is to see your previous films, and also if you could maybe talk about the impact that you imagined and that you've seen from them. And so how can people see the films, and please talk about the impact.
Sure. Well, you can see the films in a variety of ways. I have a Vimeo channel, Wave Crest Films. There's a YouTube channel under my name, Julie Bayer Salzman. I don't think it's under Wave Crest Films, but it might be. But basically, and I have a website, wavecrestfilms.com. So all three of those films are available on all those different platforms. And as far as impact goes, I mean, that's kind of a hard question to answer. Although, you know, I mean, I clearly Just Breathe has had quite an impact. We know that. I mean, I've had people reach out to me from all over the world talking about how they use, you know, whether they're teachers or therapists, tell me how important that film has been to them as either a teacher or therapist or instructor of some sort. And I mean, I've had even kids reach out to me. I had a 15-year-old boy in Chicago find me on Facebook. I had actually been in Chicago to show the film in person. I've presented at the high school I went to when I was a kid. I went back. They invited me to present to the school. And I had a 15-year-old boy come up to me afterwards in tears. Like after everybody left the room, he was the last one. And he just broke down. And years later, he found me on Facebook. And he said, I just want to thank you for that film. He said that it was something along the lines of like, that was the first day of a new life for me and my relationship with rage or something like that. Like it really impacted him to see kids talk about, you know, how they settle themselves, because that's just something that not enough people are learning. I mean, things are changing now. I definitely know that, but I mean, what it says to me is that this kind of education is so important for our society and for our planet as a whole. I mean, you know, we're really fortunate in that we send our kid, I shouldn't say kid, that's such a mean, that's not a nice way of calling. We send our son. We send our son to, you know, this wonderful school that is very progressive in its approach to social emotional learning. So we're really fortunate, but I'm well aware that that is not the case around the country or around the world for that matter. So, you know, to me, what it says to me is that, you know, millions of people we know now have seen that film just on one YouTube channel. And that doesn't account for all the other YouTube channels that it's on, because it's not just on our channel. It's on Mindful Schools, which originally uploaded it. They're the ones that have the 2.5 million hits that they put, because they put it on their channel. So we know that it's had a huge ripple effect, that film in particular. And the hope is that, you know, it eventually, that this kind of curriculum and this sort of teaching makes its way into all schools, whether they're public, private, charter, district, all and all ages, right? Like, I understand that a lot of educational reform is starting at the base level. They're really trying to start with kindergartners. But what was really interesting to me is when I was going into the third film on depression in high school, and I was trying to cast kids who had a mindfulness practice, it was almost impossible to find teenagers who were learning about this stuff. And I mean, I was fortunate in that I remembered this organization up in Portland had reached out to me after Just Breathe. They reached out wondering if I would do a film for them. But at the time, I was like, I really can't. I don't, have the bandwidth for it right now. You guys are up in Portland. I'm down in LA. They didn't have the money for me to travel or do anything for it. So I was like, sorry, I can't just do this stuff for free. However, of course, after doing Just Breathe and then Release, and it was time to do Depression High School, and I kept striking out, finding kids in LA, I called them up and I said, hey, remember me? Can I do that film for you after all? And I raised money in order to go to Portland and do it. I had also gotten a grant at that point from Release. I had submitted Release to a mental health film festival, and was awarded a little money from that festival. And so I put that towards, towards the depression film. But going back again to impact, it's like, I think people are realizing how important it is that we all get this education. And yet, it's great that they're starting to do this in elementary school, and it's starting to make its way into middle schools. But, there's still high school, there's college, there's all of us after college. I mean, it's never too late to start a mindfulness practice. And I think that's what I learned from it all was like, I have been for 25 years before that doing yoga and, experimenting with some meditation, but I didn't really understand the mindfulness aspect of it all. I mean, yoga to me, of course, was sort of like a break from my life. But what I didn't understand was how do you take your yoga off of the mat and into real life? And I think that's what learning about mindfulness helped me do was like recognize that it's not just about like going to yoga and breathing and feeling good for those 90 minutes that you're in a class and then you going back and just being yourself again. But mindfulness gave me that additional knowledge about, how do you really become more present in your day-to-day life? How do you control, how do you change the impulses into, that are sort of more reactionary into more thoughtful responses? Like that's what I think really learning about mindfulness gave me. That was the impact it had on me. And I feel like that is the impact I'm trying to make by making these films for all these different ages, is to show people that it doesn't matter how old you are, we all go through anger, anxiety, traumas of different sorts, sometimes addictions, absolutely grief and loss. Depression, we're all as human beings, like this is the sad part of our lives, right? Like this is the suffering that the Buddhists talk about. Like life is suffering. Yes, it is. And there are things that we can do to help ourselves with that suffering, help ease that suffering a little bit, help us, help ourselves and each other navigate that stuff in a way that's not so hurtful or harmful to ourselves or other people. Because I think ultimately, right, as the Global Peace Festival people, you guys, just as much as anybody else, understands that, a lot of the aggression and the hostility and the anger and the destruction that we are, doing to ourselves and to the planet is stemming from these hurt feelings that we live with, that we haven't resolved, that we don't know how to manage, internally in our own bodies, in our own minds. So, I mean, I'm just ultimately the impact I'm hoping that all of this work has, and I definitely have seen it have so far, is that it just gives people tools to help themselves. So that, because I just truly don't believe that we're going to have any really big, meaningful change on the planet if we don't start with ourselves. So, that's what I'm hoping. I definitely feel like that's happening because I can see it in the younger kids, and I can see how all of this learning is starting to infiltrate the educational system, but it needs to spread beyond schools. It needs to get into people's lives. And if these films, by being kind of short little nuggets of content, are a little more digestible than like the long feature film, let's say, and because they're more experiential and people can relate to them more quickly and feel it more quickly, then hopefully we'll have, a greater impact in a shorter amount of time, I hope.
So let's talk a little bit nuts and bolts about you're right now you're fundraising for the fourth in the series. Tell us a little bit about what you're looking for, what you need, what your schedule is, what you hope your schedule is going to be for this one and for the future ones. Also, tell us a little bit about Wave Crest Films and the other work that you do.
Sure. So with this campaign, this fundraising campaign, it's funny. People always ask me, well, how much money do you need? I'm like, how much money do I need? I don't know. It sort of depends. I put out there that I want to raise 25,000, and I, sort of not arbitrarily put that number out there, but to some extent, yes, because the reality is that, I work differently than a lot of other people. Most people kind of conceive of a film and then they decide that that's the film they need to make, and then they budget it that way. I kind of work both ways in that yes, I have an idea of what I want to do, but I'm also really practical and resourceful. And I feel like if I don't raise the money that I need to do it one way, then I will make a film with what I have. So, um, I like, for example, with the reimagine, like, yes, I would love to like raise 25,000 to do it because of all the animation costs that I know I'm going to incur. So that's the big sort of like difficult line item for me. Um, However, if I don't raise that amount, it's not that I'm not going to do the film. Of course, I'm going to do the film. I'm just going to figure out how to do the film with the money I have. So, and if I raise more than I need for this film, I'm just going to put it right into the next one on addiction and midlife. So, you know, it's kind of for me, it's more about being a good creative problem solver and being a really resourceful creative person and just saying, okay, well, you know, this is the dream budget, but you know, I don't have that, therefore, but I do have this, and therefore I'm going to do that. So, and then as far as a timeline goes, I mean, you know, this campaign goes through the end of the year, and that I did that intentionally so I could hit the ground running in January with casting. And you know, the more money I have that I can raise for this film, the more access that gives me to people around the country. So, for example, you know, Just Breathe was literally made at my son's elementary school down the street. Release kind of went more into Los Angeles because I had to source kids from all over LA who were struggling, who were willing to go on camera to talk about anxiety, and then who were willing to go on camera into a breathing lesson with like a mindfulness lesson, basically. With the depression film, I had to go beyond. I had to go to Portland because those were the only kids I could find that were really learning about mindfulness on a truly deep and profound level. Meaning, you know, these were kids who were sitting in a classroom for an entire semester getting 75 hours of mindfulness training because because basically Portland right now is the only school district that offers an elective, a 4-credit elective in mindfulness to public high school kids anywhere in the country. So for the trauma film, because of the way that so let me back up a little bit. For Reimagine, I've already started some casting, but my first person who I found is actually in Florida. So I already know that I have to get on a plane, which means it's going to be more expensive than all the other films. I mean, I had to fly to Portland, but I got to go even further this time. And you know, I know it's going to be a more expensive film, period. But I really want to be able to fly a little bit more around the country for this one, because trauma is one of those things that, I mean, you know, everybody's going through some kind of trauma right now just because of COVID alone, right? But beyond that, the reason I'm going first to Florida is because I found a kid who was at Parkland during the mass shooting there. And I really would love to start the casting process by addressing victims of gun violence and survivors of gun violence, because I think that it's just such a horrible epidemic that's plaguing our country. And, you know, so often the stories are on the victims and then the perpetrators, but we kind of forget that there are all these people that are left behind who went through something terribly traumatic and have to figure out how to continue on with their lives. And so, for example, this first kid that young man, really, because now he's, I think, about 19 years old. He was at Parkland, like I said. So I would like to find other people who have had to deal with gun violence around the country. So that film, it's going to be more expensive. So I kind of threw 25,000 out there because it felt like a reasonable number to do something that I could, to be able to have the resources to really make something powerful that went beyond Los Angeles and went beyond the West Coast even, but that could actually really be more uh, just larger in scope as far as our whole nation goes. You know, these tragedies that have occurred all over the country. I really, yeah, I just kind of, I'd like it to be a little more far-reaching as far as the casting process goes. Because I just think that, you know, the more access I have to a wider net of people, the better the film's going to be. So that's what's going on with that one. And like I said, you know, whatever I don't use, I will just put into the next film on addiction. I'm trying to think, what was the other question you asked me? Was there another one?
Yeah, talk a little bit about what else do you do at Wave Crest Films?
Oh, gosh, okay, lots of things really. So I started off in the commercial world, producing commercials, and I still do some of that as a producer. And my husband's a cinematographer, and he still shoots commercials sometimes and documentaries. He's doing a lot of more documentary work than commercial work for both of us these days. But we also have done work for a while. I was doing a lot of films for Sesame Street, and then the pandemic hit, and things kind of got a little quiet there for a bit. But yeah, and we've done work with the NRDC. Do you guys know them? The Natural Resources
Defense Council. Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, so we've done just a variety of commercial work, corporate work, TV work, you name it. I mean, we're filmmakers, we're storytellers. I also write. I have a couple of screenplays down now that I would love to develop down the road. I've kind of not pushed myself too far to go into that direction just because as a mom, I'm sort of trying to monitor my own growth, professional growth, so that it somehow is commensurate with like being a mom and being at home and available to my son. And now we have a second son now who we started fostering right before the pandemic hit. And then we all kind of fell in love with each other. So now we're his legal guardians. And he is 14 and he started high school. So basically I have a 13 and 14-year-old, an 8th grader and a high schooler. And, you know, in a few years when they're out of the house, then I'll put more energy into trying to develop my screenplays into full features, because I really want to do that down the road too. But at this point, I'm just trying to make sure I'm somebody who's actually around for her kids and not off and on location for months at a time. I don't know how people do that. I couldn't do it. So yeah. But like I've just got called to produce a television commercial for January. So, you know, we do a variety around here.
So finally, besides, obviously people can make a donation and you'll see the information where you can make that donation on the closing title card. But is there any other way that you think that people watching this can support your work, especially this series?
Yeah, right now, I can always accept donations. There's PayPal, there's Venmo. No, but more importantly, I think just getting the word out, right? Like just sharing the campaign with friends and family members and colleagues and, people who are maybe interested in mindfulness, who are interested in just I don't even feel like it has to be about mindfulness in particular. I think it's just about who are really interested in putting content, who want to support content that has, I think, a deeper meaning and purpose other than just being, entertaining for the sake of entertainment, right? And I think who are willing, who want to make an impact themselves. I mean, I think we're all just, we all just need to help each other out, right? So if it's not a financial donation towards the project, if it's just sharing the campaign with people, great. I mean, I don't think there's, at this point, it's like, it's unrealistic to say that I would ever get too much money to do any of this work. I mean, there's so much work to be done that, I think whatever I'm able to raise will get used for this kind of work. It's not going to go into anything else. It will always go into these projects is all of these projects, the four so far, if you include Surfing Corona. So this will be the fifth, really. But as far as the mindfulness series goes, it's the fourth. But all of this work has always been out of pocket. It's always been, I've done some crowdfunding over the years, but nobody's paid me for this stuff. I don't charge money for it, really. I mean, on occasion, if somebody wants to use it in like a training seminar or something, I'll ask for a very nominal fee just to sort of, you know, get a token gesture out of it. But yeah, this money, this series is never, you know, it's never made money. I don't make money off of it. I just spend a whole lot of time and energy, and I do it because I feel like it just needs to be done. And I think I do it pretty well. So, you know, not to toot my own horn, but, you know, I'm proud of the work. I'm really proud of the work. I never thought I would be doing work like this. So it's funny to me to think about, you know, it's like 7 years ago, I was writing an erotic screenplay. I was not thinking about mindfulness, you know? So it's funny how life kind of takes you on these journeys. I never saw myself doing this kind of stuff, doing this kind of work and telling these sorts of stories, but I love doing it. I love seeing the impact the films are having. I think it's super important that the work, that it continues to get out there, that these films get made because they are being used. I mean, it's not, I think that these are films that people watch and they sink in. Like it's not just like, oh, okay, I saw that done. I think people take it with them.
One thing we need to say is that you've made them all available for free.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I put them out there because I just want people to access them. So I don't, you know, I haven't, this is not a lucrative business. Let's put it that way. Not a good business model. But yeah, so yeah, I put them out there, and I hope that people keep sharing them, and I hope that they find that they're, you know, that they're helpful for themselves and for the people they love, and that we just ultimately, you know, as I like to say, and I said in my Indiegogo campaign, like, we just get to a better place collectively as a species. Like, that's the goal.
Oh, that's wonderful, Julie. Thank you so much, and thank you for, you know, for telling us so much about your process, because I think that was really helpful. And speaking as someone beyond college, thank you also for saying there's hope for us to still take mindfulness into our lives. So I really appreciate that you're making films for us as well. And thank everyone who watched this Glow. Please do, if you are interested in Julie Baer Salzman's work, please do check it out at wavecrestfilms.com. And for more information on the Reimagine project, the one that she is currently crowdsourcing for, particularly for that animation, please do go to the indiegogo.com/projects/reimagine #, which you can see on this card. Please do go and check it out. She will be keeping this campaign open through to the end of the year, December 31st. And remember to go to peacefilmfest.org to keep up to date with all of the information about the upcoming 20th anniversary celebration that will be going on throughout 2022. Again, thank you for joining us in conversation, and we'll see you at the next Glow.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for watching.